In the summer of 1966, we achieved much of the exploration of Canada's greatest discovered cave, Castleguard Cave, one of the most remarkable alpine caves known in the world because it goes much deeper underneath a major glacier than any other cave that is known. Boone and Thompson went in as a pair. We laddered below the AT, they went down it and made a very long exploration, a magnificent exploration through a cave, very wet, for 24 hours or so, and came back out, back up the 80-foot ladder, down the Vados entrenchment, the typical canyon passage, towards the wet canal crawls, only to find that those had disappeared. The cave, the lower cave, was flooded.
Mike scooped out a hollow or a trough in the sand and silt of the cave floor. Looked more like a shallow grave to me. And we climbed in, snuggled up, spooned, and tried to keep each other warm.
So there we were, and then we were there about 7 hours or so. And then the draft started. Pete said, the draft has started. And I said, well, if we go down there, this is what I thought, if we go down there and find that we can't get out, then we may not have enough light to get back to the spoonery spot.
They'd not come out, so the other chap and I, or three of us if I remember correctly, went in to see what had happened. We went through the canals and the water was higher than I'd seen before, and it was running quite rapidly. I could see the water level rising a bit. A few hundred meters beyond the canals we found Boone and Thompson, gave them some light. Boone wanted to go back to the 80 where he'd left his spectacles behind. I said no, we're going to get the hell out of here. The cave is going to flood back up again and we don't know how long it will last.
A few hours later, a wall of water came out of the cave entrance, having risen up an 8-meter shaft. And as far as we know, that the water flowed out of the cave for the next 10 days.
That was an epic exploration that Mike Boone and Pete Thompson made that day. But it did mean that we were shut out from Western exploration.
There was a lot of politics going around. Basically, this idea of a cave that flooded, trapping whoever was inside, was anathema to the parks people. And I imagine they had sort of discussions about it, and basically they realized that this was potentially lethal. Regulation 34A. And 34A said, no person shall enter any cave in a national park without the permission in writing of the superintendent.
We returned again in a winter expedition in, I think it was 1970, where explorers pushed ahead, found one very dangerous passage and set it aside, a tributary, a branch, went up another branch and were halted by a rock wall, obviously a waterfall site, dry in winter conditions, from a higher passage above. They halted there. Boone was not on that trip. Mike had been sporadically taking courses for his English language degree, but getting more and more psychological problems. Many of your correspondents will tell you he had considerable psychological difficulties, though in many respects he was a lovely man. He was very humane, sometimes, and impossible to live with. I did not feel that it was possible to bring him along on exploration. Boone recovered from his troubles. He was very upset that he had been excluded from the party, and in November of that year he did what's probably the greatest solo exploration in the history of cave exploration anywhere. One man alone, he walked those 18 kilometers. There would have been heavy snow, and the valley below the glacier, up the Saskatchewan Glacier, which is a substantial glacier, as I mentioned, with moulins that would be concealed now by snow bridges and dangerous crevasses concealed by snow bridges. Up there, a hard struggle to get off of the glacier onto the so-called meadows, the moraines above it, down the meadows to the cave mouth, and then he portaged, he ferried the equipment he needed systematically all alone up the cave. At that time of year, November, not only was the weather conditions outside the cave terrible, but the conditions in the cave entrance were terrible too. The water would have been very close to freezing, but not yet, the ice not yet thick enough to support a body sliding over the ice in the entrance canal section, the 300 meters or so he had to wade through this shatteringly cold water. But as we know, he solo climbed that 30-foot obstacle that had stopped his predecessors a few months before, and explored on for a few hundred meters until he was stopped by a wall of ice underneath what we now know is it'll be condensation ice freezing in underneath the heart of the Columbia ice field. There's 300 meters or approximately 300 meters of glacier ice overhead when you reach that point. That was an epic exploration, and we all still here in North America still gasp in recognition of his feat.
In summer 1972, I'd made a film about the Pierre St. Martin, then the world's steepest cave system. But after gross mismanagement by BBC Manchester, I finished up losing money. Disillusioned, I'd then taken a job at BBC Leeds as a news cameraman, and I hated it. I was consequently a lousy news cameraman. Then suddenly out of the blue, I got this letter from Mike Shawcross asking me to be director cameraman, no less, for the Castleguard cave movie in Canada. I hesitated for about 2 seconds. Parks Canada had become aware that Castleguard Cave was a unique asset to the Banff National Park and therefore wanted to promote it. A film was proposed, but they had a dilemma. Mike Boone's solo trip, completely without permission, was considered not only against the park rules, but in their eyes, foolhardy. Their understandable reaction was that as far as the film was concerned, it didn't happen. On that condition, and that condition only, the film was given the go-ahead. The team eventually all congregated in Banff, Alberta on the 31st of March 1973. To be greeted by the helicopter that was to transport all of the team and their equipment up the Saskatchewan Glacier to a camp already established close to the cave. The ride in was hugely impressive, and so was the camp. 3 8-man tents, each fitted with 2 colour gas heaters, which we had been told would increase the temperature inside at night nearly up to 0 degrees. We had a total team of 27 caving filmmakers. The 5 actors were all veteran McMaster University cavers. There was Sitch Morris, an expat Londoner, Pete Thompson, Mike Goodchild and Charlie Brown, who were all Canadians. And then there was the other one, Derek Ford, who happened to be the film producer. Derek's wife Margaret and my wife Alison were to be cooks at the surface camp. In case of accidents, we had an expedition doctor, Doug Newberry, while Ralph Hewes was in charge of battery charging and other technical requirements. Of the 13-man Sherpa team, several were from the British Isles. There was John Donovan from Blackpool, Yorkshireman Mike Shawcross, now studying at McMaster, Tony Walton from Nottingham, Pete Smart from Bristol, and Owen Finn from Cork in Ireland. And then there was the film crew. I was director-cameraman. Frank Binney, a caver and film student from Texas, was to be my assistant cameraman and sound recordist. Canadians Russ Harmon and Bob Bignall were to be general film assistants, while Linda Hasty would act as clapper girl, but also as camp cook during the underground camp phase. Filming on the surface was not a problem, particularly in view of my evident snow skill. However, in those days, filming underground on 16mm would mean plenty of manpower, logistics, and a hell of a lot of light. We had 24 lighting packs, each constructed from a 12-volt snowmobile battery, which weighed 25 pounds and would power a 100-watt quartz halogen lamp for up to 90 minutes. They were enclosed in protective wooden cases, which were designed to be easily carried in several ways, as Titch demonstrates here, even if one does appear to have been dropped. The first underground filming session was to involve 9 days of filming, entering the cave on a daily basis and progressively filming our way as far as the 80-foot shaft. The porters would carry in new sets of charged batteries as we needed and take out those that we used. A telephone line would also be laid for communication.
The cave entrance, hard enough to find in summer, is almost completely obscured by the winter landscape. 2 earlier summer expeditions into the cave were frustrated by natural hazards and lack of proper equipment. But this time, the cavers have come prepared, with enough food and gear for an extended push. And if they're right, they'll need it, because Castleguard could well be the longest cave yet discovered in Canada, and the most dangerous. The team leader is Derek Ford, 39, a specialist in cavern genesis and professor of geography at McMaster University some 2,000 miles away.
Caving is a great sport. I'm a professional geographer because I fell in love with climbing mountains and exploring caves and decided to turn it into a profession if I could, and was lucky enough to do so.
Titch Morris is a master carpenter by trade. He's the team cook by default.
I first started climbing, but I found that caving was a lot more interesting. Well, with climbing, you can pick your route out and study it from a safe position and then go ahead and climb it. Whereas underground, you find your handholds and your footholds as you get to them.
Mike Goodchild, the youngest member of the team. He's been caving since he was 12, when he tackled the one in his backyard.
Cavers are lunatics. Take a look at this lot. Here's Charlie Brown. He's a squeeze freak. He gets a big kick out of finding the smallest and tightest place in the cave. I guess that's because he's the smallest. He stands the best chance. Pete Thompson, he's a climbing freak. He likes to find a piece of rock that he can climb up and fall off. Then there are the vertical freaks, the people who like to find a great pit in a cave and climb up and down it on ropes, yo-yo up and down. But I guess if you look at this lot in general, they're a pretty representative bunch.
Though no one would ever accuse cavers of being overly modest, this so-called representative collection is probably one of the most seasoned caving teams in the world, with an average of over 17 years' experience each. And it was because of their unique qualifications that they were especially invited by Parks Canada to attempt to explore Castleguard, to survey its length and to evaluate its potential scientific significance. Because Castleguard extends under glaciers and an ice field, it offers an excellent opportunity to study the last ice age in the Rocky Mountains. With this expedition, Canadians will be able to see part of a national park that is too fragile and too dangerous for them to visit in person. Caving is no sport for weekend hikers. It's a dangerous business. Anyone wanting to explore caves in a national park should first contact a park warden. Though the entrance to Castleguard has been known locally for many years, serious exploration began only a few years ago when Michael Goodchild led a reconnaissance expedition. The cave looked promising, but without full equipment, they were able to explore only the first 470 feet. Like the casually curious before them, they were stopped here, a 30-foot drop, straight down. Impossible to negotiate without ropes or ladders. Before the descent, Titch secures himself to a 2,000-pound test safety line. There are risks enough in this kind of work, so you take precautions where you can.
Caving to me has got a lot of the pioneer spirit in it. That feeling of going into an area where nobody else has ever been before. It's just plain true exploration. It's never knowing what's there and how the problems come up. If you find a hole, a shaft going down it, you never know how deep it is, and there's always a very tense moment when you set off over the edge of it to explore, treading new ground. And it's very challenging mentally and physically. You've got to be really up to it and on top of it. And I think in the long run you tend to know yourself a lot more. You accept a few challenges each day, but it feels really great to be at your limits, but to know that you're still in control. I can't go too long without pushing myself a little bit.
At the bottom of the 30, the cave takes on a new personality. A quarter mile of ice crawls where ice bubbles like jewels trapped in a crystal sea ornament a surrealistic underground world.
Apart from laying for hours on the cold ice floor, there was one unique advantage to the ice crawls. More so for the porters. Give a 20-pound battery a shove and it would go for 20 to 30 feet under its own steam. At this point in the cave, even in winter, the temperature is marginally above zero, resulting in pools of icy water that then need to be crossed, with the prospect of hours hanging about filming on the other side. To solve this problem, fishing waders had been left in place on the earlier reconnaissance trip.
Castleguard.
2 lessons were learned. Firstly, that pack rats go into the cave to escape the outside cord, and secondly, that a hungry pack rat will nibble at waders. Nevertheless, certain actors kept too dry, and consequently I had to make them wet their boiler suits for the shot, and some didn't take that very well.
Beyond the crawls and pools lies a half-mile of relatively easy passage, a respite from the constant crawling and the last stretch of known cave.
Easy passages can be quite deceiving. They tend to lull you into a false sense of security, and it's quite tempting to drop your guard. It's always dangerous to get overconfident. Your light only lets you see about 15 feet ahead, and then the terrain can change pretty suddenly.
And it does. Like a trap set for unwary prey, the passage ends abruptly in an 80-foot vertical shaft, 1.25 miles from the surface, and the farthest point reached by the second expedition. To a caver, finding new territory is like no other experience in the world. Charlie Brown will be the first man ever to descend into the 80.
It was during the editing that Havelock, the editor, who happened to wear a white suit and carried a handbag, said to me, "The National Park wants to say that exploration starts at the 80 and that Charlie Brown is the first down it." "But I filmed him from the bottom," I protested. "Oh, nobody will notice that. Cavers will, and Boone certainly did." 10 days of filming in the cave, we were all flown down to Banff for a short break and to view some rushes. Then back up the glacier for a second 90 days underground. This time we were to stay underground and camp deep inside the cave. Now a few words for the technically minded about the ingenious battery charging system that made this all possible. A generator near to the cave entrance fed a variable transformer, and that provided a controllable output from 0 to 125 volts alternating current. A transformer boosted that maximum to 270 volts AC, and this was then rectified to give the direct current as needed for charging. It was then passed via a current sensor and a relay before being fed via 6,000 feet of cable to the charging base close to the bottom of the 80-foot shaft in the cave. While charging, the current sensor continually checked the charging current and adjusted it accordingly by means of a motor mounted on top of the variable transformer. If the generator ran out of fuel or the charging stopped for any reason, the relay would trip and an alarm would sound at the tents, which was not all that popular. At the charging base, at the foot of the 80, up to 8 batteries could be connected in series, unlike normal charging practice, and charged overnight at a rate of 3 amps. A warning lamp and a telephone link assured that the power was never switched on when anybody was in the area. The voltage was potentially lethal. The porter's task during this second stage of filming was to move charge batteries from the charging base to wherever they were needed, and to return the discharge batteries that needed recharging. In view of the distance from the surface, the Sherpas, in spite of the sections of difficult terrain beyond the 80, often opted to do double carries in a single day, and so gain an extra day's rest.
Beyond the squeeze lies the subway, a uniform 15 feet in diameter, 1/4 mile long, and straight as a die.
At the time that the passage developed, it was completely full of water under high pressure, which dissolved the floor, walls, and ceiling simultaneously outwards to create the shape that you can see. It's really a ruddy great gun barrel.
A stream, the echo of a once mighty underground river, has formed a small, muddy trench at the floor of the subway, converting what could be an easy passage into a 1/4 mile of ankle-wrenching hopscotch. Five and a half hours and 1.5 miles from the surface, Castleguard again changes radically. Beyond a cleaved slab marking the end of the subway, a huge fissure, some 60 feet high, stretches into the blackness.
The fissure is a very good example of the other basic type of solution cave shape, one that we call vadose. Here the water did not fill all of the passage, it merely flowed as a river along the floor, so it was able only to dissolve the floor, and it has dissolved it downwards in a deep trench, creating an underground canyon.
I like the challenge of the fissures. It's very challenging from the point of view that you're choosing the right way of tackling the various problems, the climbs and the slippery rocks. It's one continuous challenge from start to finish.
You have to concentrate all the time. There's no slacking off. You've got to make sure that your feet go in the right place all the time. You've got to watch your handholds, your footholds. And there's always this worry about a slip. And if you do have a slip, and it's down the rift and probably an accident.
If someone were injured, I'm of the opinion that it would be almost impossible to get them out without causing them further injuries. So many possible places where he can be dropped and you would tax a rescue team so much that the dangers of another accident would be very high. And I'd be inclined to try to set up a supply team to bring the injured man food and sleeping bag and whatever medical care we could get to him, and try to let him mend by himself. But then again, if it were a really bad injury, I would give him a very small chance of getting out alive.
We would be camped 8 days in temperatures near to zero, and of course the camp itself also needed filming. Close to the camp there were also formations to photograph and science. It was all slow, cold work.
In that most of your kit has been dragged a long way, and it's damp, you're wet and cold, and the sleeping bag's damp and moist, and there's grit in the bag, and you're cold in general. But after 13 hours of continuous caving with a pack on your back, it's somewhere nice to creep into. It's somewhere that you can stop, somewhere that you can cook up, somewhere that you can lay out a sleeping bag and creep into and get warm again.
At 37 degrees Fahrenheit, this is the warmest part of the cave. Hammocks and air mattresses help to insulate from the cold, damp floor, but even so, it is necessary to sleep fully clothed. Inside, the cave is perpetual night. 15 hours into the third day, Derek and Mike settle in to wait for the return of the push team.
Hi, pleased to see you. We're beginning to get worried. All okay?
Yeah. Sorry I was so late.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, took a bit longer than we expected.
About 15 hours.
Yeah.
Good push. How'd you make out?
Oh, pretty well. Believe it or not, ends in ice. Cool.
Fantastic.
Peter and I have both seen many different kinds of ice in caves in the Rocky Mountains. This particular ice is very coarse and irregularly crystalline. It leaves us in no doubt that it's glacier ice, that the main cave passage has run out into the base of the Columbia ice field, that there's approximately 1,100 feet of glacier overhead.
With the filming complete, the labour-intensive task began to remove all the equipment from the cave. It was during a carry through the rift passage that what we had always feared happened. Ralph Ewers took a fall. Fortunately, he only sustained a sprained ankle, and with help managed to make his own way out. With everybody out safely, it was now time for me to travel to Montreal for the editing. As far as the National Park was concerned, the film would be a success. However, certain members of the caving community were understandably more critical.
Just got the movie, actually, the Castleguard movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I finally was able to watch it. It was quite entertaining.
You know the kettle drums.
But yeah.
Oh, the movie of Castleguard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that was a complete fake exercise.
Yeah.
From start to finish. There's no word of truth in it.
Oh, a little bit, yes. They briefly, very briefly mentioned your name.
Of course, Mike was right. There was no way the film could tell the true story. The national parks were paying the money, and as far as they were concerned, he'd broken every rule in their book by going without permission, and what he did was completely foolhardy. If he had had an accident, there's no doubt the national park would have had an enormous problem, and so would the cavers from McMaster.